ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this session on the state of nature in Green Week. We are talking here from the square, live in Brussels, but plenty of you and of colleagues are remotely connected with us. The state of nature of the European Union, of course, is based on two reports which have been published yesterday by the European Environment Agency and by the European Commission, a technical report and a policy report that look at the evolution of the conservation status of species and habitats in the European Union. And this afternoon, we are very fortunate to have here with us Florika Fink-Hooijer, who is the Director General of DG Environment of the European Commission. And that connected remotely, we have Hans Bruyninckx, the Executive Director of the European Environment Agency. And together with them, which are the main speakers for the afternoon session, we also have three experts, one from the European Environment Agency, Eleni, Tryfon, and then two from the European Topic Center on Biodiversity, Zelmira Sipkova-Gaudillat and Sandra Naumann. Thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon. And I'll just explain a little bit the logistic and the plan for this 1 hour session. First of all, I would like to advise you, in case you want to ask questions, to go to the bottom right of the screen in front of you, and you will see there is a little question mark, and you can click on that and post your questions. And we will try to pick them up as we go along the debate. And for the rest, we will start with Hans Bruyninckx, who will give us in a couple of minutes an introduction to the State of Nature report, and then we'll hear a reaction from Florika Fink-Hooijer. After a brief exchange, we will move to three short video presentations that will zoom in on different aspects of the State of Nature report, which concern marine biodiversity, agriculture and forestry, and then the link between biodiversity and climate change. And as we go along, we'll try to have a lively debate. So, of course, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Nicola, Notaro, the head of the Nature Protection Unit in DG Environment in the Commission, and I'm honored to be your moderator this afternoon. Okay, I think without further ado, I would suggest that we go to Hans Bruyninckx at the European Environment Agency, and we put up his presentation so that he can take us through the slides and give us a feeling of the results of the State of Nature report, which has been the subject of a huge effort involving, I think, 200,000 people all over Europe in the last few years. So looking forward to hearing from Jan. Hans, please.
Thank you, Nicola, and also Florika for giving me the chance to present indeed this big piece of work where indeed 200,000 contributors, about 60% of them volunteers or in modern language citizen scientists, but also a lot of colleagues across Europe in the Topic Center for Biodiversity and the agency contributed. And what we did was we brought together all the knowledge that comes from a reporting cycle every 6 years under the nature directives, and we looked at 2,000 species and 230 habitats in Europe. And based on that big amount of data, I think I can send some key messages in the next 10 minutes. Next slide, please. Well, let's look at the first, I think, sobering message. Europe already said in 2000 that we would halt biodiversity loss or the further deterioration in status of species and habitats. And if you look at the red line, that's where we should be now. If you look at the dark green line, that's we were in 2010. And you can see that by now we did not reach any of the red lines. So we failed on the key objectives of halting biodiversity loss in bird species and habitats. And in some cases, we didn't even reach the 2010 target or just barely reached it. And this speaks to poor policy implementation. I want to emphasize that the implementation is not only or even primarily the responsibility of ministries of environment or nature protection. This is often a linked responsibility with other ministries, and I'll come to that when we look at the drivers. Next slide, please. In a bit more detail, if you look at birds directive, the conservation status and trend, where we looked at more than 460 species, you see that since 2015, the last report, we actually lose 5% of the species that are in good status, and we add 7% of the species that are in poor and bad status. We know a bit more because those species that are, not clear, that number has gone down. But what is especially concerning is the deteriorating status for farmland birds, which is 54%, and for forest birds 17%, and that is really concerning at many levels. Then we go to the next slide, where we look at the Habitats Directive, and we looked at 224 terrestrial habitat types and 9 marine habitat types and 1,400 species of interest. And based on the analysis of the habitats, and we should be at the next slide, please. Thank you. If somebody could push the forward button. Yeah, well, I will not dwell on it. If we look at more than 800 assessments on habitats, we notice that only 15% of the habitats in Europe are in good status, only 15%, yeah? And more than 80% are in poor or bad status. And we see an increase in that since 2015. If we look at 2,800 assessments of species, we see that only 27% of the species are actually in good status. And that is equally concerning, of course. If I could go to the next slide. That does not seem to be the case. Can somebody nod their head if you still hear me? Can you still hear me?
Yes, Hans, there's been some little disturbance, but we can still hear you and see the presentation.
Okay, then I will just continue. I think it is important, if we want to understand the way forward, that we look at the pressures. And the member states in this reporting cycle reported 67,000 pressures on nature and biodiversity. And if you look at the most important ones, agriculture came out as the most important one. Then urban development, leisure and tourism as a second important one. And we don't know much about that in terms of real monitoring and reporting, quite frankly. Then pollution came out, where again, more than 50% of the pressures there were linked to agriculture and the food system. And if you then look at illegal hunting and killing, this is primarily important for some species of birds and, for example, the bycatch for marine species. What is growing in importance is the climate change as an independent pressure on biodiversity. And as we understand the linkages between those two more and more, we need to take them into account in our policies. If I can then go to the slide on addressing pressures and looking at conservation measures, the member states mentioned more than 6,000 targeted conservation measures, mostly to maintain or restore status. What we notice is that nearly 20% of those are targeted at agricultural activities, which is a good thing because that is the most important pressure as well. Most of them are local, which you could say is a good thing, but I think it's important to point out that the connection between all of those local measures is important if you think of biodiversity as an interconnected web at the European level. And it's clear that a number of these measures will need to be scaled up, for example, in coastal zones or in connecting habitats. Next slide, please. One of the success stories, I would say, is Natura 2000, where it's the largest network in the world, and you could say that it is the backbone of conservation of nature in Europe, with almost 28,000 sites that are part of Natura 2000, with almost 20% land cover and 10% of sea cover. It is the most important backbone. What we do notice is that there is rather uneven coverage of species and habitats, where plants are well covered by it. But if you look at marine species and species like turtles, there is poor coverage. So the good news is the following, that policies matter. That where we are in Natura 2000 territory, we see significantly better status and conditions for species and habitats, especially where we have a highly covered habitats and where we are seeing good management practices. And that's where I think there should be some emphasis on better management practices and also on using the full potential of the network. And that for me means scaling up some of the issues of the benefits and also connecting between the different parts. Then the next slide is a link, I think, also to the ambitions of the biodiversity strategy. It's on restoration, restoration of habitats and species to improve their status and to improve the trends, turn them around and create or recreate lost areas of habitats in quantity, but also improve the condition, which refers to quality. And we know that this is possible. Nature can come back under certain conditions, and if we really take it seriously. And good examples are, of course, also the link with what is now looked at in terms of climate mitigation and adaptation. And that is the link with climate, where if you look at carbon-rich habitats, there is a clear ambition to recreate a number of square kilometers and to improve a large number of square kilometers. If I go to the last slide then, I think what is clear is that, and if you, one more click, if you look at the European Green Deal, the biodiversity strategy is one of the key priorities. But I think by now, and I think it's a clear message that you can distill from the report, is that it has strong linkages with the ambition to become the first climate neutral continent. If we want to go to zero net emissions, we will need to strengthen the natural carbon cycle, which depends on biodiversity. If you think of new circular economy, it will depend on whether we can source other materials coming from strong ecosystems and not from weakening ecosystems. Zero pollution is critical. Pollution is a key pressure on biodiversity. The farm to fork strategy links our food system to biodiversity in fundamental ways. And I think it's clear that if you think of a just transition, there are many messages coming from the nature and biodiversity side as well. The distributional aspects are not equal there. If you look at the investment side, I think here's a serious challenge of trend biodiversity in financeable projects that are attractive to both public and private finance. And I think if we come with a new industrial strategy in Europe, it has to be clear that it cannot.
I think we have lost the connection with Hans for the moment, but actually he was coming very much to the end of his presentation, so I hope that in a minute, yes, we have Hans back with us. Hans, a final word. You were really on the last bullet of your last slide.
Yeah, well, I think the key message is the following, that we need to understand that we are dealing with what some people don't like to call that way, but natural capital. And it is the foundational capital for our society. And we are banking on it for our future. We want nature-based solutions. We want nature-based chemistry, bio-based chemistry. We want better food. We want better health. It will not happen without stronger and better biodiversity and ecosystems. So this is really the foundational capital of human existence. And we need to turn this around, very much in line with the ambitions of the biodiversity strategy, and you can count on the agency and its networks to provide solid data and information in support of the policies. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and I think it was the message was crystal clear. The news are not that good in terms of the evolution of conservation status and of species and habitats in the EU. But the more we know, the better equipped we are to actually tackle those pressures. And here the agency plays, of course, a very important role. And Florika, now I would like to come on to you and really ask you, what is that we can do to tackle these challenges that Hans has explained? And what is DG Environment planning to do? What is the Commission planning to do?
Thank you very much. But first of all, let me thank really Hans and the colleagues in the agency, but also the member states entities who helped collecting the data, and most of all also what you called, and I learned a new word, the citizen scientist. I mean, the many, many volunteers who provided the data. So thank you for this very comprehensive, but also absolutely crucial data set that we need to have in order to have this comprehensive health check on our own nature in Europe. So thank you very much for that. Now, the last slide, in a way, of Hans is almost capturing everything, because there you see how it intertwines and is interrelated with the different policy strands that we have. But let me also first say a few other words, because this is now the third State of Nature report, and indeed, we had the message. It is not very positive. On the contrary, I think you're very clear and loud on saying we have not reached the targets, we actually have failed. So when you ask me now, what are we going to do? Actually, we are going to set even higher targets. Now, you might say, well, this is absurd. We have failed on the 2020 targets. But I think given the state of nature, we can't do otherwise. I mean, we cannot say we are complacent. We actually have to be even more ambitious. I think that's absolutely key. And I think it is doable now because we have more awareness. We have more awareness not only by citizens, in particular citizens, but also politicians. We had the Global Leaders Pledge now in New York. But in a way, COVID has almost amplified that, because there's almost everybody now understanding the importance of nature, the importance of also intact nature, and the importance of intact ecosystems, because people long for nature now. So that's relatively clear. You know that you actually, with your colleagues, I joined later, have put forward the Green Deal under the leadership of the President. And the President said something also very clear. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And that's why, again, this report is so important, because it sets the baseline for us, on which we have to, the benchmark, if you want, on which we have to say we go further. So we have to do it in a holistic way. I think that was the last slide from Hans, who made that very, very clear, and which means not just only fisheries, agriculture, forest, and climate change, climate adaptation, mitigation. It's also about industrial policy. I'm very much agreeing on this, about Zero Pollution Act, about circularity, a lot of what is, let's say, in DG Environment's portfolio. We also need investment. I mean, we have said in the biodiversity strategy that we would unlock 20 billion per year. That's quite a lot. It is doable. It is there. That is not the issue. But we also have to see what do we gain, because in the beginning we talked about the Natura 2000 network, which has been strengthened, and that is one of the at least positive messages we get. Natura 2000 network generates services, nature-based services of 30 billion per year. So this is also something our politicians have to perhaps reflect upon. Now, we would like to have this this recovery going into a green recovery. We mentioned that in the first session today, but we have three main targets for us. I mean, I say for us because we are in the same DG. First of all, strengthening implementation and enforcement. We have seen it works if we go on rule-based targets, but we also have to make them respected. The second one is enlarging the space for nature. That's again picking up on the good example, the good results for Natura 2000. We have set new targets under the biodiversity strategy, 30% more of protected spaces for land, 30% more for marine areas, out of which each time 10% should be under specific protection status. That's ambitious, but it's again doable if we do it collectively, I mean with member states collectively as European Union. And then third, we want to go for binding restoration targets. That's probably one of the most ambitious, but again, it's based on what we already have as legislation, and we look at perhaps where we have gaps. All of this needs, as I said, the baseline and the absolutely important but also sobering report that we have received now. But it is a stimulation for us to go ahead with the three main issues I just mentioned.
Thank you very much, Florika, for outlining the policy responses that are basically contained in the biodiversity strategy and that can really take us forward. Of course, as you say, we have a big challenge ahead of us because the ambition of the biodiversity strategy is very high, and of course delivering it is a big challenge for the Commission in the starting place. But of course the Commission is only the one that starts the process, and then it's for the Member States and stakeholders to help us deliver together. Actually, you've already addressed one of the questions that came through the chat, which was about the implementation and enforcement of EU legislation, as you underlined. The importance of this as a priority to make some improvement in those status and trends that Hans has shown us are not going very well. We have a very dense session, so I suggest that we move forward and we go to the first of the three short videos that we want to show to you. And the first one has been recorded by Eleni Tryfon, and it's about marine aspects of the strategy, the State of Nature report, which are reflected in the biodiversity strategy as well. So we will watch the video and then have a little exchange about that.
The EU has an enormous marine part that equals 1.3 times the area of Europe's land and covers 5.7 million square kilometers, and also an ambitious policy to address the challenges of the marine environment. The Marine Strategy Framework Directive requires member states to achieve and maintain good environmental status. The Habitats and Birds Directives also protect the marine environment. The Birds Directive protects all naturally occurring wild marine birds, and the Habitats Directive all marine mammals and reptiles. However, in the Habitats Directive, other marine features have a weak and not representative coverage. Out of the 233 habitats, only 9 are marine. They cover approximately 7% of EU marine territory, and almost all of them are habitat complexes. Marine covers 42% of the Natura 2000 area, but Natura 2000 sites do not cover marine species as adequately as most terrestrial ones. Unknown assessments prevail in the marine, particularly for species. For specific groups like mammals, the unknown assessments reach almost 80%. The share of poor and bad assessments is particularly high. Results differ per regional sea. Marine Macaronesian has almost all assessments unknown, whereas in Marine Baltic, poor and bad assessments prevail. As regards pressures, fishing activities causing disturbance and bycatch seem to be the most important ones. For habitats, the modification of coastline like sea defenses and coastal protection infrastructure is also a high-ranked pressure. Non-bird species are pressed also from pollution, including plastic and noise pollution, which particularly affects mammals. Ship strikes are a significant pressure for mammals and reptiles. Marine birds are pressed from sport and tourism, from illegal killing and hunting, particularly in the wintering season, from bycatch and fishing activities, and also from alien species, particularly in the breeding season. To meet the marine targets of the EU Biodiversity Strategy to 2030, there are many challenges to overcome. To ensure resilient marine ecosystems, we need to close knowledge gaps by establishing appropriate, innovative, coordinated monitoring, to strengthen the implementation of the acquis to ensure no deterioration and achieve recovery of species and habitats, to identify, establish and properly manage protected areas and no-take zones, and last but not least, to sustainably use the marine resources.
Thank you very much, Eleni, for that short video that really sums up the key messages. And there are many issues that could be discussed, but there's one element which is really striking to me, and this is the knowledge gap in the marine. Almost 60% of unknown in the reports of the member states in relation to species and habitats. I would like to ask Hans, at the agency you try to foster the development and dissemination of knowledge. What can we do to improve this situation?
Well, I think it's a matter of consistency, investment in this monitoring and reporting in the marine environment, and also of innovation. I think it's clear that the emphasis is often on more terrestrial monitoring. It's also the natural tendency to talk about terrestrial biodiversity and ecosystems and habitats. But I think this separation is not very helpful, because at the end of the day, the interaction between the marine environment and the terrestrial environment, we understand better and better. In coastal zones, for example, as they are impacted by climate change, as the pressures in the marine environment end up from terrestrial pressures. So coming up with a better mandatory system of monitoring and reporting in the marine environment is critical. Now, we are also losing and wasting valuable information that is out there, for example, from the fisheries industry, but that is not easily shared with people who are doing the analysis of our type. So better use of what is there, innovation, for example, through Copernicus services, and understanding that it's probably not the best approach to make that strong separation between terrestrial and marine environments, but to integrate better the data and the knowledge that we have, I think would be ways forward.
Thank you very much. So modern technology, I hear from Copernicus, better use of what we have, and the reporting cycles we have under the habitats and birds and marine strategy framework and fisheries, better joined up action. A lot of work where we can improve. Florika, I wanted to ask you to react a bit to the challenges that have been presented in the video by Eleni. What can we do to start addressing this daunting challenge of protection of the marine environment in terms of biodiversity strategy proposals for it?
Let me perhaps first pick up on the issue of the knowledge gap, which is linked obviously also to the challenges, because we do have the possibility under Horizon Europe, under LIFE, other research project to really channel that into the right direction and now use the research money. We have quite a lot for that, but also really to look at to cover the knowledge gap as regards marine ecosystems. The other one, the way to tackle one of the challenges, I mentioned it already, is to enlarge the protected areas, especially the marine areas, where I think it was in one of the slides of Hans, we could see that there we are at 10% or something. That's really not as where we should be going. So that's one of our challenges, but also our objectives in order to reach that. Then obviously also to restore the fish stock, or at least not deplete it further. This is where we have maximum yield targets, but at least the respect of that, you talked about enforcement, is also, of course, important. Our counterparts in DG Mare will look at a specific action plan on marine conservation measures. I saw it in one of the slides. Bycatch was mentioned, or the issue of harmful fishing practices, which would tamper with the integrity of the seabed, was mentioned. This is where we have to work together. I mean, at least bring forward. It's a very difficult discussion, but again, it is also in the interest of sustainability, also for the fishery sector. So it's for all.
Absolutely, absolutely. There is no fishing sector future without,
Exactly.
in fact, valuable ecosystems which are protected. Yes, well, of course, we could stay on this for the rest of the afternoon, but we'll have to move on to the next video, which has been recorded by Zelmira Sipkova-Gaudillat, and it will focus on agriculture and forestry-related challenges.
In the next short point, I will focus on agriculture, forestry, and nature. I will first zoom on main findings from the new State of Nature report, and then point out challenges we face bringing nature restoration together with farming and forestry. Almost 2/3 of the area of habitats protected by the Habitats Directive are agricultural or forest habitats. The EU's nature is a mosaic of natural and semi-natural elements, and we need to remember that this contributes to its specific character and its richness. The results from the recently published report show that these semi-natural habitats, and especially those which fully depend on the extensive agricultural use, are in worse status and have more deteriorating trends than other habitats. The report also demonstrates that together with urban sprawl, current agricultural and forestry practices are dominant drivers affecting the protected habitats and species. Actually, more than 1/3 of reported pressures are associated with either agriculture or forestry. For agricultural habitats, the quality is strongly correlated with the intensity of human interventions. Not surprisingly, various pressures related to intensive agricultural use come on the top of the reported pressures. On the other hand, extensive agricultural use creates and maintains semi-natural habitats, and abandoning the related activities represent an important pressure as well. On its turn, among pressures related to forestry, wood extraction and forestry management on one side, and conversions from one to another type of forest are the most important pressures. In my previous slide, we have seen that status and trends of many protected habitats and species are linked to the way we produce our food and exploit our forest resources. In order to address agricultural pressures and bad or further deteriorating status of agricultural habitats and species, we need to bring nature fully into agricultural policies and practice, together with other environmental and socio-economical issues, like assuring neutral environmental and climate impact of agriculture or food security. This requires actions at multiple levels, from transformative changes of food systems to adapting locally agricultural practices or creating and preserving natural elements in agricultural landscapes. Forests, apart from their intrinsic value, are delivering multiple services like climate and water regulation, carbon sequestration, and many others. Under global climate change challenge, the efforts to improve status of forest habitats and species must subscribe to broader efforts aiming at increasing the resilience of forest ecosystems and promoting their regulatory functions. Preserving natural processes and close to nature forestry in this context play an important role in improving quality of EU forests.
Thank you very much for summarizing the gist of such a huge area in the state of nature in relation to agriculture and forestry. Well done. And I would like to invite everyone who wants to know more, of course, to go on the website of the Environment Agency and the European Commission, and you'll find the full text of the report and a lot more of information and data that you can actually use yourself and dig in the various areas. But back to our panelists here, and I'd like to start with Hans again and ask you, Hans, about the forestry part, really, and in particular, what do we need to change in order to counter those trends? For instance, you pointed out that forest-dependent birds are dramatically in decline, and it's the same for common birds dependent on agriculture ecosystems. What can we do, particularly in relation to forestry, but on both areas, if you like, to make the change?
Well, I think the two key parts of the answer here are rather obvious. That is, reduce the pressures, and we've been through them in extenso, even in a short time period, but we know them by now. And the second thing is ecosystem-based management. And that is a word that we use now a lot when we speak about biodiversity and how it links to ecosystem services and how we can benefit as a society. But if we want to do that in a sustainable way, we will need to base our use of those ecosystems and on ecosystem-based management. And there are some serious issues to be discussed when it comes to forests, because we count on forests as a critical element of biodiversity. But also we talk about the bio-based economy, bio-based chemistry. We talk about building materials, about energy, about fiber, about making textiles out of forests. They play a role in climate change mitigation and adaptation. And you need to ask yourself the question at the end of the day, does it all add up? Yeah, does it all add up? And I think what is very encouraging, I think, is that the biodiversity strategy has more of an integration there and an understanding of that than we had before. Secondly, Europe is for the first time taking a forest strategy and a forest policy really serious, where it failed in the past. And we now see it as a critical element of the integration between biodiversity, moving into a different economic model and different chemicals and the climate change debate. So I think if there has never been a better moment in Europe to discuss forests in all their dimensions, which is probably also why it's such a hot political potato at the moment.
Thank you. Yes, certainly. But I hear some optimism coming up now in this part of the discussion, which is a bit reassuring. Actually, we have a good analysis of the situation. We know which are the solutions that we should promote, and we need to make more efforts to put them in place. But Florika, there was also a question on the chat in relation to what is happening in the Parliament and Council in the discussions related to the CAP. I wanted to hear from you your reaction on what can we do, what measures do we need that the biodiversity strategy, but also the farm to fork strategies altogether can help us move these policies forward together, because ultimately that's the most difficult challenge we have experienced over the years.
Well, I will not comment on the debate, but I can say on what we have put forward. And as you said, in both the farm to fork strategy and also in the biodiversity strategy, to simplify was very, very simple. 50% less fertilizers, 50% less pesticides, 25% more organic farming, and then 10% more on non-productive land use, such as wells, ponds, hedges, which are a little ecosystem in themselves, right? And that's what we had put forward. And we hope that people will pick it up, because in the slide we just saw before was the two pressures: intense farming and abandoning of agricultural land. And to both we try to make a answer, or give an answer, by setting certain objectives or certain targets, again, in order to sustain also the food chain.
Yes, I mean, listening to you and to Hans and to just the two pressures you have identified, you can see a connection there. People are abandoning rural areas that become depopulated, and then habitats is deteriorated because it's semi-natural and depends on the presence of people, of farmers to maintain it. And at the same time, we are intensifying agriculture. So it looks like de-intensifying can keep people in rural areas. It looks like reducing one pressure can be used to address the other pressure. There is an interesting link there that is to be explored, and I think nature protection, protected areas may be part of the solution in that regard. Okay, I think it's time to move to the last of our short videos, and this time it will focus on the links between biodiversity, climate, ecosystem restoration. And the video has been recorded by Sandra Naumann, and we are ready to start with it.
Hello, my name is Sandra Naumann and I'm part of the European Topic Center for Biodiversity, and I will talk about opportunities and challenges to foster biodiversity and climate targets in the light of ecosystem restoration. As we already heard in Hans' presentation, the majority of habitats is degrading, which is also impacting the status of our species. As part of the work on the State of Nature report, we calculated the area of protected habitats that need to be restored to achieve a good condition, which is estimated to be approximately 250,000 square kilometers, which is 5% of the EU27 territory. And at least 46,000 square kilometers of this area concerns marine habitats, in particular in the marine Atlantic region. But these figures are also underestimated given the incompleteness of the reported data and high number of unknowns in the marine area. This means that the actual need for areas to be restored is much higher. Let's take a look at the carbon-rich ecosystems, which are key to achieve climate targets by sequestering carbon, such as forests, bogs, mires, fens, grassland or coastal habitats. Approximately 16% of the carbon-rich surface area of protected habitats need to be restored to achieve a good condition. And just to give you an idea of the mitigation potential, we will look at peatlands and agriculture areas. And those degraded peatlands are responsible for 5% of the total EU greenhouse gas emissions. So what we know is that healthy ecosystems are key to address multiple societal challenges, such as the loss of biodiversity, human health and well-being, food production, and of course climate change mitigation and adaptation, which becomes very clear if we see that the natural sinks make up for 60% of global anthropogenic carbon emissions. And recognizing this potential, it is vital to use the synergies between biodiversity and climate, but not at the cost of biodiversity. So what could be potential risk of pursuing climate goals without giving full considerations to biodiversity protection? This could be, for example, not using nature-based solutions at a large scale, for example, in the case of agroecological practices, or renewable energies, which can put a serious pressure to biodiversity, in particular hydro and wind power, but also biofuels. It could be also the misuse of offsetting schemes, for example, using simple afforestation to compensate for habitat loss due to, for example, the extraction of oil resources. So, to make a significant step forward and address the loss of biodiversity and the bad status of habitats, the Commission will put forward a proposal for legally binding EU nature restoration targets in 2021, as we already heard. And a specific focus will be on carbon capture and storage. So this is a huge opportunity for our nature and climate, but it also requires careful considerations of potential risk and must ensure that biodiversity is not damaged by any actions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sandra. I think once more the message is quite clear. Here we have opportunities and challenges. We have some big possibility to marry a bit these two policies and bring them together. And I would like this time to start with you, Florika, and look at the positives and the opportunities that we can harness to make sure that the climate goal and the biodiversity goal are reinforcing each other.
I think it's a message that is starting to literally sink in, if I may use that now, that euphemism, because if we go for 55%, 55 for climate neutrality, we will not reach that without also taking into account what we just heard, the peatlands, the marshes, the forests, the wetlands, and that is exactly because of their characteristics for being a carbon sink facilitator. So I think there is a clear trend of accepting that both climate mitigation, climate adaptation and biodiversity have to be together, sort of mutually reinforcing. And that is important because when we now go for the investment plans, we have to look at both solutions in parallel and not just only go on the, let's say, energy efficient solutions, but also really on the long term. And the long term is investing also in landscape features, in ecosystems, which also create jobs, which also create possibilities for the economy, but also are absolutely important for, you know, reaching climate neutrality. So I think this is starting to be more understood and also is reflected in our own policies now.
Yes, and this 30% mainstreaming of the next multi-annual financial framework that is being debated by the co-legislator, then it's quite important for biodiversity as well, because even if it's not devoted to biodiversity, it can have a very, very positive role for it. But Hans, I would like to go back to you and to go to maybe the most controversial aspects of this relationship, this dual challenge of biodiversity crisis and climate change. What are the trade-offs between the two, the things we need to be really be very careful of in climate change policy because they may undermine biodiversity policy goals?
I think some of those things are by now rather well researched, like the idea to use biofuels for certain applications based on virgin biomass. I think if we would have done what some people said 15 years ago, we would be in a really, really bad place when it comes to that link between so-called solutions for climate or greener mobility and biodiversity. The same can be said for some of the, I would say, rather naive ideas of any tree that we plant in large enough amounts somewhere is going to play the role that we expect forests to play, both in climate and in biodiversity. That is not going to be the case. So there are multiple trade-offs to be made, and we need to be very careful in understanding the systemic interactions there. And I think on a scientific trajectory, we are rather far advanced there. Yeah, when it comes to merging these two agendas in a clever way in policy making, I think we've got some time to travel. And when it then comes to implementing that at the various levels of policy implementation, I think those are often two separate worlds. People who think in climate terms tend to stick in certain categories and in departments, and those who deal with nature are in other departments. And on top of that, they're often regarded as the soft people. Yeah, they're the softer ones because it's not as as hard an agenda. Well, by now we know that the two are interrelated, and if we want strong climate solutions based on nature, we will need strong nature. If we want a strong blue economy, we will need strong blue. And that means a strong ecosystem in the marine environment. So I think using the knowledge that we have and shying away from easy solutions without thinking them through is where I think we should be going from a knowledge perspective.
Yes, thank you, Hans. And having passed in my career from the hard to the soft side of the policy work that you have described, I can recognize that dichotomy you described. But at the same time, I see new opportunities for us to actually make the two policy converge. And the targets for 55% reduction of greenhouse gases emissions by 2040, the Commission has put forward, gives space, in fact, for the role, as Florika mentioned, of land use change, and forestry in that regard. So we have an opportunity there. But I see you want to comment, please.
Yes, I think it's more than space. I think by now it's clear that if we are going to be a net zero emission continent, there is no other option than to strengthen the natural carbon cycle. And so we will need to go to soil biodiversity, which has long been neglected also in European policies. We will need to reflect on what type of forest policy we want. We need to protect the most sensitive and carbon functional ecosystems. They've been mentioned by the others already. So I think it's more than an opportunity. There is a mandate now and an obligation to look at these, the natural cycle. Otherwise, we will never reach net zero emissions. So it's a strong plea to integrate the two agendas in the most clever way in the next years.
Thank you. I think the plea is heard, and of course, we heard you saying it's a must. There is no climate neutrality without the possibility of relying on a healthy nature. So this lies really ahead of us. I see that we have a couple of questions coming up in the chat, and so I would like to also pick them up. And one is about why would it work this time? We know we have analysis of the problem which are pretty solid. We have solutions which are perspective ahead of us. But why politically is it going to work this time, what instead did not work last time? Florika, you were not there last time because you were working on a different field, so you're not responsible for the current failure, but we are. But why do you think we have a chance this time, if you do?
Well, just to say, I came before also from humanitarian aid and civil protection and crisis management, and actually there you see what it makes, what it brings, drought, famine, pandemics like Ebola and so on. So I must say I came perhaps from a different side, but I definitely come from that side with a sense of urgency on resilience building in particular. I think we have no guarantee that it works. I'm actually banking a lot also on the youth, the next electorate, but I also hoping that politicians feel that heat from the youth, and they do, because they are becoming more aware. This Friday for Future has made people rethink. It is known, the awareness has grown. I also think that there are business opportunities which the private sector, the private investment sector sees, perhaps less yet so much on the public investment side. And I think also because we do really have no choice. I mean, everybody sees now the floods, the fires, increasing the problems on pandemics. I mean, it comes closer and closer to even everyday life. So if now politicians and our member states do not wake up, I mean, when would they? I also have to say there was something said on our responsibility, which links also, of course, we have to walk the talk at home. But at the same time, we are also a strong internal market. We do have also leverage. So when we talked about the importance of forest as carbon sink, what we can do in deforestation and looking at the value chain of products coming into our internal market, where we actually are the biggest consumer in Europe, we have to address it as well. But that gives us also some leverage. That's basically our agenda on deforestation on the global level. But okay, that's another story. But I think there are possibilities for us to act. And I just hope that also with this Green Week, Those who follow us here will be multipliers to speak to, the local level, the regional level, and the central level.
Yes, thank you very much, particularly for connecting also with the international and global agenda this afternoon. Of course, we are focusing on the state of nature in the EU, but obviously there is a very strong interlinkage, and we're all getting ready for whenever the Conference of the Parties in China will take place in order to try and seal an international agreement. And we have a huge responsibility with our internal market. Hans, I've seen a question in the chat about the scientific basis for the solutions that we are discussing. And some of the people watching us wondering, well, where is this scientific basis? Are you sure that what you are proposing are really the right solution? The Commission came up with this strategy even earlier than expected because the new Commission anticipated the time originally planned. So do you think that from a knowledge perspective, actually, what we put forward and the ideas, they are science-based, they are solid enough?
Yes, they are science-based and they are solid. Does that mean that on every aspect of that science is 100% sure of what the causal mechanisms will be? If you tweak this wheel or you do that, this will be the outcome? No, I think but that's how science works. Science is a continuous advancement and questioning of assumptions. But I mean, let's be very clear. We understand the mechanisms better and better, and Europe plays a major role in that because it's the largest investor in this type of knowledge. We understand the interactions with other parts of our existence, like climate change, much better, and we know where the key pressures are. So we have an obligation, I think, to act on the best available knowledge without being overly confident or throwing all eggs in one basket, but work on the best available knowledge and then monitor very closely what is happening. Have serious discussions about also what might not be working, analyze that and try to avoid these mistakes. And this is all part of what we call the transitions thinking, where there are multiple pathways that you have to experiment with to then point you in the right direction. So I would say, are we 100% sure on everything? No, that's not how science works. That's also not how policy works, by the way. And so we need to work with what we have, but in an intelligent, open, honest way, and have a conversation about what works and doesn't work. And that is, I think, the best collaboration between science, knowledge, and policy that we have available. What definitely doesn't work is pseudoscience. The sort of fake news, the alternative facts, that definitely doesn't work. We know that. So we have an obligation as knowledge players to be very firm and stand behind what we bring to the table, but in an honest and open manner.
Thank you for that. And of course, in the last few months, the relationship with science has been in everyone's focus, and we have certainly learned, all of us, those who didn't know, that absolute scientific certainty doesn't exist, but we have to do with the best science to take the best decision for everyone. So thanks for that reminder. I see some additional questions, but it's really the end of the session. We have just a couple of minutes left. So unless you would like to make some final remark, I would like to try to draw this to a closure. And I would like to do that, maybe referring to some words and some image that Florika used before when she spoke about the youth. And we have a lot of responsibility on our youth nowadays. We are asking them to stay home to protect their elderly. We're asking them to march, or supporting them to march in the street to protect our climate. We want them to mobilize for biodiversity. And indeed, they have this mobilization power and this energy that is absolutely fantastic, and we have a lot of hope. But we also have a big responsibility in our our own generation. And for all the things that we can still do and decide ourselves nowadays, not the youth, who most often do not have the decision-making power, and therefore we have a great responsibility vis-à-vis the younger generation. And the challenge is the dual challenge of biodiversity and climate change, as it was also referred to by the President of the Commission in this speech at the Leaders' Pledge just a few days ago, is the biggest challenge that humanity faces nowadays. We, of course, this afternoon have touched upon some of the small-scale and larger-scale responses that can be provided in that respect. And I hope that this will be food for thought, but not just thought, food for action for plenty of people, of citizens, of colleagues that have been watching us this afternoon. Before closing, I'd like to thank all participants for having shared their time, their knowledge, their huge expertise. I would like to invite those who want to know more about the State of Nature report also to visit the virtual exhibition hall 2, where you'll find the leaflets that we have prepared on the State of Nature report in the Green Week virtual publication stand. And the very final words go to thanking two special colleagues, one in my team and one in the Environment Agency team, who have been the soul and hard workers behind this State of Nature reports, together with many others. So I'd like to thank wholeheartedly Angelica Ruben in Unit D3 in DG Environment, and Carlos Romao from the European Environment Agency, and of course all colleagues present here today. Thanks a lot. Good afternoon.
Thank you.